It was supposed to be Hollywood's biggest night, but what happened next would change the Oscars forever. A moment so shocking, so unbelievable, that audiences around the world gasped in real time. A name was called. A winner stepped forward. But within seconds, everything fell apart. A slap, a stolen victory, a rejected Oscar, a standing ovation for a fugitive, and a scandal that made the world ask, how did this happen? This isn't just about movies. This is about history, power, justice, and the moments that Hollywood tried to erase. These are the biggest scandals in Oscars history, and once you hear them, you'll never see the Academy Awards the same way again. The slap heard around the world, 2022. The 94th Academy Awards was supposed to be a celebration of cinema, a night where Hollywood's brightest stars gathered to honor the best in film. But on this particular evening, something happened that no one could have predicted. Something that would overshadow every award, every speech, and every winner. Chris Rock took the stage to present the award for Best Documentary Feature. Known for his sharp wit, he delivered a few jokes, poking fun at the celebrities in the audience. Then, he turned his attention to Jada Pinkett Smith. With a smirk, he made a remark comparing her shaved head to Demi Moore's character in G.I. Jane. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Jada didn't smile. She rolled her eyes, visibly unimpressed. For a brief moment, the camera cut to Will Smith. At first, he appeared to laugh along with the joke. But then something changed. Within seconds, he stood up, walked onto the stage, and in front of millions watching around the world, he slapped Chris Rock across the face. The sound was sharp, unmistakable. Rock staggered slightly, stunned but still standing. The audience gasped. Some thought it was a staged bit, a scripted moment designed for entertainment. But then, Smith turned back to his seat and with a furious expression shouted across the theater, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." The room fell silent. Rock, still shocked, tried to brush it off. "Wow, Will Smith just smacked the truth out of me," he said, attempting to laugh. But Smith wasn't laughing. He repeated his demand, louder, angrier. The mood in the room shifted. Some watched in disbelief, others in awkward silence. It was clear. This was not a joke. It was not scripted. It was real. Despite the shocking moment, the show continued. Minutes later, the winner for Best Documentary Feature was announced, but hardly anyone was paying attention. Backstage, chaos erupted as producers scrambled to figure out what to do. Should they escort Smith out of the venue? Should they address what had just happened? No one had a clear answer. And then, in a twist that only Hollywood could deliver, Will Smith won the Oscar for Best Actor. He walked back onto that same stage, this time not as a man in fury, but as a man in tears. In his acceptance speech, he apologized to the Academy, to his fellow nominees, but not to Chris Rock. He spoke about love, about protecting his family, about the burden of being in the public eye. Some saw sincerity, others saw an attempt to justify his actions. In the days that followed, the backlash was swift. Smith was condemned by many, supported by others. The Academy launched an investigation. Some wondered why he had been allowed to stay in the theater after the slap, why he was still able to accept his award. There were calls for him to be stripped of his Oscar. Some demanded a lifetime ban. Smith, realizing the damage that had been done, issued a public apology to Rock on social media, calling his behavior unacceptable and inexcusable. But the apology wasn't enough to stop the consequences. He resigned from the Academy. Days later, the Academy handed down its decision. Smith was banned from the Oscars for 10 years. As for Chris Rock, he chose not to press charges. He made a few passing jokes about the incident in his stand-up shows, but largely stayed silent. It wasn't until a year later, in his Netflix special Selective Outrage, that he spoke in depth about what happened, taking aim at Smith and the entire situation with his signature biting humor. The slap became more than just a moment of celebrity drama. It became a global conversation. Was it an act of toxic masculinity? Was it a man standing up for his wife? Was it a lapse in judgment or something deeper? Everyone had an opinion. One thing was certain: the Oscars would never be the same. In a single, unscripted moment, Will Smith had turned Hollywood's biggest night into one of its biggest scandals, and no one would forget it. The wrong Best Picture winner, 2017. The Oscars had seen its fair share of surprises, but nothing could have prepared the world for what happened on February 26, 2017. It was the final award of the night, Best Picture, the biggest honor, the moment every filmmaker dreamed of, and it was about to become the most infamous mistake in Oscars history. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, two Hollywood legends, walked onto the stage to present the award. Beatty opened the envelope, paused, hesitated. Something wasn't right. But instead of stopping, he passed the card to Dunaway. She read it out loud. La La Land. Applause erupted. The cast and crew of La La Land rushed onto the stage, hugging, celebrating. This was their moment, the crowning achievement of a film that had already won multiple awards that night. The producers took turns giving their speeches, thanking their families, their teams, the Academy. Then something strange started happening. A stir, a commotion. Behind them, Academy officials and stage managers scrambled onto the stage, whispering, exchanging frantic glances. At first, the audience didn't notice. Then one of the La La Land producers, Jordan Horowitz, stepped forward. His face was serious, his voice steady. "There's a mistake," he said. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. "Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture." Gasps. Silence. Was this a joke? Some thought it was a prank, another scripted Oscars moment designed for shock value. But it wasn't. Horowitz held up the correct envelope, showing it to the cameras, making sure the world could see. It clearly read, "Moonlight, Best Picture." The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in disbelief. The cast and crew of Moonlight hesitated, unsure of what to do. Then slowly, they made their way to the stage. A mix of celebration and awkwardness filled the room. The moment that should have been theirs alone was now tangled in chaos. Warren Beatty took the microphone, trying to explain. He had been handed the wrong envelope. Instead of the Best Picture envelope, he had received a duplicate of the Best Actress envelope, the one that had just been awarded to Emma Stone for La La Land. That's why he hesitated. That's why he looked confused. But in the pressure of the moment, the mistake wasn't caught in time. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Memes flooded the internet. Headlines called it the biggest blunder in Oscars history. How could such a mistake happen? The Academy and PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accounting firm responsible for handling the winners' envelopes, faced intense scrutiny. In the days that followed, apologies were issued. PwC took full responsibility. The two accountants in charge of the envelopes were removed from future Oscar duties. Security protocols were changed. But the damage had already been done. For Moonlight, the win was historic. A groundbreaking film about identity and self-discovery created on a small budget, now standing as the rightful Best Picture. But its moment had been stolen, overshadowed by confusion. For La La Land, it was a bizarre and heartbreaking reversal. 1 second, they were Oscar winners. The next, they weren't. For the Academy, it was a lesson in live television's unpredictability. A moment that would never be forgotten. And for the world watching, it was a reminder that even on Hollywood's biggest night, mistakes can happen. Mistakes that no one will ever stop talking about. Marlon Brando rejects his Oscar, 1973. The 45th Academy Awards was supposed to be just another glamorous night in Hollywood, a celebration of the industry's biggest stars. But on March 27, 1973, the Oscars witnessed something it had never seen before, an outright rejection of the golden statue, and it came from one of the most legendary actors in Hollywood history. Marlon Brando had been nominated for Best Actor for his role as Vito Corleone in The Godfather. His performance was already iconic, a masterclass in acting that had redefined cinema. When his name was announced as the winner, the audience expected to see Brando walk up to the stage, accept the award, and deliver a speech. But instead, something entirely different happened. A woman in a traditional Native American dress walked onto the stage. She was not Brando. She was not an actress. Her name was Sacheen Littlefeather, and she had been sent by Brando to make a statement. She reached the podium, holding up her hand, stopping the statuette from being handed to her. The room fell silent. She introduced herself and, in a calm but firm voice, delivered a shocking message. Marlon Brando has asked me to tell you that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. A ripple of confusion ran through the audience. People exchanged puzzled looks. Some clapped. Some booed. No one knew how to react. Littlefeather continued. She explained that Brando was rejecting the Oscar in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans in film and the mistreatment of indigenous people across the country. She referenced the ongoing standoff at Wounded Knee, where Native American activists were engaged in a tense confrontation with U.S. federal authorities. Brando wanted to use this moment, the biggest stage in Hollywood, to bring attention to an issue that the industry had long ignored. As she spoke, a mix of applause and boos filled the theater. Some members of the audience respected the stand Brando was taking. Others saw it as an insult to the Academy, a disruption of the night's festivities. Backstage, John Wayne, an actor known for playing cowboys and soldiers in countless films, was reportedly furious. Witnesses later claimed he had to be physically restrained from storming the stage. After the ceremony, the backlash was immediate. Littlefeather, a young activist and actress, faced intense criticism. She was mocked, blacklisted, and struggled to find work in Hollywood after that night. Talk shows ridiculed her. Some claimed she wasn't a real Native American, though she had been born to an Apache and Yaqui father. Brando himself remained unapologetic. He later released a written statement detailing his reasons for rejecting the Oscar, criticizing Hollywood for portraying Native Americans as savages, villains, or background characters without dignity or humanity. He also expressed frustration with how the film industry had reinforced damaging stereotypes for decades. The Academy was left shaken. In response, it banned winners from sending representatives to accept or reject awards on their behalf. It was a rule aimed directly at preventing another moment like Brando's. 50 years later, the Academy issued an official apology to Sacheen Littlefeather for the way she had been treated. They acknowledged the racism she endured and formally recognized her courage. But for decades, she remained one of the most controversial figures in Oscar history. Brando's rejection of the Oscar was more than just a protest. It was a moment that exposed Hollywood's deep flaws, its reluctance to face uncomfortable truths. It turned the biggest night in film into a political statement. And it proved that, sometimes, silence is more powerful than any acceptance speech. Roman Polanski wins an Oscar. Despite rape charges, 2003. The Academy Awards have always been a night of glitz, glamour, and celebration. But on March 23, 2003, the Oscars faced one of its most controversial moments, a moment that divided Hollywood and stunned audiences around the world. The award for Best Director was about to be announced. The nominees were some of the most respected filmmakers in the industry. Then the envelope was opened, and the winner's name was read aloud. Roman Polanski, the pianist. Applause erupted across the theater. A standing ovation followed. Some of Hollywood's biggest stars, Meryl Streep, Martin Scorsese, Harrison Ford, rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. But there was something deeply unsettling about the moment. Polanski was not in the theater. He was not in the country. He was not even legally allowed to attend the ceremony. Because Roman Polanski was a fugitive. Decades earlier, in 1977, Polanski had been arrested and charged with the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. The details of the case were horrifying. He had given the girl champagne and drugs before assaulting her. He was charged with multiple felonies, including rape, but in a plea deal, he pleaded guilty to unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. Before sentencing, fearing he would receive a lengthy prison term, Polanski fled the United States. He never returned. For years, the case lingered in the background of his career. He continued directing films in Europe, celebrated for his artistic genius despite his fugitive status. His defenders argued that he had suffered enough, referencing his tragic past, the brutal murder of his wife, Sharon Tate, by the Manson family in 1969. His critics, however, pointed to the undeniable facts. He had pleaded guilty to a crime, fled justice, and continued living a successful life while his victim had been left to deal with the trauma. And yet, on Oscar night in 2003, Hollywood chose to honor him. When his name was announced as the winner for The Pianist, Polanski wasn't there to accept the award. He couldn't be. If he stepped foot in the United States, he would have been arrested. Instead, Harrison Ford later presented the Oscar to him in person at the Deauville Film Festival in France. The standing ovation was what made the moment even more shocking. Hollywood's biggest names, many of whom championed progressive causes, stood and applauded a convicted sex offender. To the outside world, it looked like the industry was openly celebrating a man who had evaded justice. The backlash was immediate. Outside of Hollywood, critics condemned the Academy for rewarding Polanski despite his history. Some actors and filmmakers who had been at the ceremony later admitted they regretted standing up and clapping. Others doubled down, arguing that Polanski's artistic contributions should be judged separately from his personal life. Over the years, the controversy never faded. Attempts were made to bring Polanski back to the U.S. to face sentencing, but he remained in Europe, where he continued to direct films and receive awards. In 2018, amid the Me Too movement, the Academy finally expelled him from its membership. But by then, the damage had been done. Polanski's Oscar win remains one of the most disturbing moments in the Academy's history, a reminder that, for decades, Hollywood turned a blind eye to serious crimes when it suited them. And on that night in 2003, justice wasn't just ignored, it was given a standing ovation. Oscars So White Controversy, 2015 to 2016. The Academy Awards had long been known for its glamour, its prestige, and its ability to set the standard for excellence in film. But in 2015, a controversy erupted that would shake the foundation of Hollywood and expose a deep-rooted issue that had been ignored for far too long. The nominations for the 87th Academy Awards were announced. As the names were read, something became glaringly obvious. Every single nominee in the 4 acting categories was white. No black actors, no Latino performers, no Asian representation, just an all-white slate of nominees. The backlash was immediate. On social media, the hashtag number Oscars. So White began trending, created by activist April Rain. It wasn't just a criticism, it was a movement. The outrage grew louder as people pointed out that films featuring powerful performances by black actors, like Selma, Creed, and Straight Outta Compton, had been largely ignored in major categories. Ava DuVernay, who directed Selma, was snubbed for Best Director. David Oyelowo, who played Martin Luther King Jr. in the same film, was left out of the Best Actor race. Instead, the film only received nominations for Best Picture and Best Original Song. Hollywood, a place that prided itself on being progressive, suddenly found itself on the defensive. The Academy's voting system was put under the microscope. Critics pointed out that the Academy's membership, those responsible for selecting the nominees, was overwhelmingly white and male, with the average voter being over 60 years old. The problem wasn't just about that year's nominations. It was about a system that had excluded diverse voices for decades. Then, the following year, in 2016, it happened again. For the second year in a row, all 20 acting nominees were white. Once could be seen as an oversight. Twice? It was a pattern. The outrage exploded. Celebrities began speaking out. Jada Pinkett Smith and Spike Lee announced they would boycott the ceremony. Other stars, like Will Smith and Lupita Nyong'o, voiced their disappointment with the Academy's failure to recognize diverse talent. The Academy scrambled to respond. President Cheryl Boone Isaacs, one of the few black leaders in the organization, vowed to make changes. But the damage had already been done. That year's host, comedian Chris Rock, took the controversy head-on during his opening monologue, calling the Oscars the White People's Choice Awards. His speech was sharp, biting, and unfiltered, putting Hollywood's hypocrisy on full display. Under immense pressure, the Academy was forced to act. They introduced sweeping changes, pledging to double the number of women and people of color in their voting membership by 2020. They also promised to diversify the types of films that were considered for nominations. The impact of Darsh Oscars, So White, was undeniable. In the years that followed, the Academy made noticeable efforts to recognize more diverse talent. Moonlight won Best Picture in 2017. Parasite became the first non-English language film to win Best Picture in 2020, and Black and Latino actors saw increased representation in nominations. But the controversy left a lasting mark. It exposed Hollywood's long-standing issues with race, representation, and inclusion. It proved that change doesn't happen without public pressure. And it showed that even in an industry built on storytelling, some of the most important stories were still being ignored.